When the alarm started beeping, no one else in the building seemed to hear it. Not because it wasn't loud, because no one should have been there. Clara froze mid-sentence over her notes, her pen trembling slightly above the paper. The echoing sound came from behind one of the metal doors in the abandoned hospital wing. It rang exactly 3 times, paused, and stopped as if noticing her listening. She told herself the same thing she always did when studying alone at night. It's just old wiring, the sensors are sensitive, the place is ancient. But tonight, something about the silence afterward felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, as though the air itself were waiting. The silent wing, that's what students called it. Once part of the university hospital complex, sealed after a small electrical fire years ago. The new generations barely even noticed its shadowy outline behind the modern glass wards. But those few who had late classes near the place swore they sometimes saw a faint orange light flicker behind those sealed windows. Clara hadn't meant to be there either. Her forensic pathology class was preparing for midterms, and every lab and library table had been full since early evening. So at 10 p.m., out of desperation, she followed a rumor that the basement labs of the old wing were unlocked for technicians doing maintenance. The rumor turned out to be true. She set up her books in a narrow laboratory with peeling white paint and empty shelves. The small lamp on the corner desk buzzed, and dust motes floated in the pale circle of light. Nothing unusual, except for that strange intermittent heartbeat of the old building around her. It was the smell that got to her next, the faint, uneasy sweetness of formaldehyde. It felt too fresh for a place supposedly unused for decades. Trying to focus, Clara adjusted her headphones and resumed her anatomy sketches. The sound of graphite on paper steadied her nerves. She had always found comfort in details, angles, bone structure, proportion. Facts didn't scare her. People's stories, however, often did. At midnight exactly, all the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the hallway beyond her door. Only the thin green glow of the emergency sign remained. Clara's laptop screen reflected her own startled face. She whispered, "Power saving mode again, great timing." She opened the door quietly, peeking into the corridor. Her footsteps sent hollow echoes up the tiled walls. Down the hall, a small red light blinked on the wall telephone, one of those ancient landlines only hospitals seemed to keep. Clara felt a faint vibration through the soles of her shoes, as if someone down the hall was moving a metal cart. She stepped closer and realized the sound was not getting louder, just clearer. When she reached the intersection, she could see the outlines of another door ajar, its glass panel reflecting a dim glow. Something metallic rolled into the hallway and stopped. A surgical trolley, empty, dusty, and moving on its own momentum. She whispered, "Hello? Security guard?" Her voice bounced, unanswered, down the corridor, fading into a strange rhythmic clicking, like steel wheels turning against the cracks of old tiles. Pressing her back to the wall, Clara watched the trolley slowly drift until it touched the far wall and stilled. The air felt colder now, unnaturally dry. It was the same kind of cold you feel in a morgue. She hurried back to the laboratory, shutting the heavy door and locking it. Her pulse roared in her ears. "You're overreacting," she muttered to herself. "Just gravity. Floors aren't level." But the emergency intercom crackled suddenly. A flat, recorded female voice echoed through the static. "Ward inspection completed, patient discharged." Clara froze. The speaker was embedded in the ceiling. She looked up into it, expecting another line, but nothing followed, just the hum of static fading again into silence. She backed away toward her desk, hand trembling over her phone. No signal, of course. There never was in this part of the hospital. The tapping began again, this time closer, softer. 3 taps on glass. She turned toward the window. On the fogged-up pane was a handprint, small and precise, as if made only moments ago. Clara's throat tightened. Through the distorted glass, the corridor looked empty. She stepped back, heart hammering. She remembered the rumor she laughed at earlier in the semester. Students claimed that one late nurse, trapped during the 1975 fire, still patrolled these corridors because she didn't finish her last round. Clara had thought it silly then. Now she wasn't so sure. The handprint began to fade. Water droplets trailed down like sweat. Suddenly, the lamp on her desk flickered back on. Then another light down the hallway. The power had returned, at least partly. She took a deep breath, gathered her books, and told herself she'd go home, even if it meant walking past that trolley again. She reached the doorway and hesitated. The corridor looked different now, warmer somehow, hazy yellow instead of emergency green. At the far end stood a figure in white, head lowered, hands resting on the same trolley that had been moving earlier. "Excuse me," Clara called, relief flooding her voice. "Are you the night staff?" The lights went out. The figure raised its head. It was a woman, her face calm, lined, almost kind. A nurse's cap sat perfectly centered on silver hair. The woman smiled faintly. "It's all right, dear," she said. "Everyone's gone home. You shouldn't be here alone." Something about her tone was gentle but wrong, too perfectly measured, like playback from an old recording. Before Clara could answer, the woman continued, "I'll walk you out. But please, don't step inside the children's ward." Clara's mouth went dry. "There's no ward here anymore." The nurse's eyes shifted briefly to the wall, where beneath flaking paint, Clara could just make out faded stencils. "Pediatric Unit, Ward C." When she looked back, the nurse was gone. The only thing left was the trolley, standing perfectly still in the center of the corridor, and the faint scent of burned antiseptic, drifting like a memory. That smell should have been decades old. Clara turned and ran. Behind her, somewhere deep inside the darkened hospital, a woman's calm voice whispered through the intercom again. "Patient discharged." And for the first time, Clara noticed, the alarm that woke her earlier hadn't really stopped. It had only been waiting for her to listen. The next morning, Clara woke up unsure if anything from the night before had actually happened. Her textbooks lay exactly where she had dropped them. Her phone showed no missed calls, no signal history from the time inside the silent wing. It almost felt ordinary, except for the faint bruise-like shadow on her wrist, the shape of a hand that had seemed to pull her when she ran. Classes passed in a blur. When she looked out across the quadrangle, the sealed hospital stood silent beneath the fog. During lunch, a group of students nearby joked about the ghost nurse who lost her round. Clara nearly laughed with them, but her voice caught somewhere in her throat. By evening, she couldn't stop thinking about the trolley. Her rational mind insisted on one thing. If she didn't go back now, she'd spend every night doubting herself. She needed to know that what she saw was just leftover movement, a draft, reflected light, anything real. So after her final lecture, she slipped past the staff corridor again. No one noticed. The night door was still loose enough for a determined hand to open. The same corridor greeted her with that dim, unnatural smell of antiseptic trapped in dust. But now every flickering lamp felt conscious, watching. The silence pressed on her shoulders like weight. When she reached the junction where the trolley had appeared, she stopped. On the floor, faint dark streaks curved toward the pediatric ward doors. Drag marks. She followed them slowly, each footstep echoing back twice, as if something was walking behind her at the same pace. She turned. Empty hallway. But the emergency intercom above her head clicked again. The same calm female voice whispered, blurred by static. "Medication delivered, patient responding well." Clara's heartbeat quickened. "Who's speaking?" she shouted. "Who are you?" For a moment, only static. Then soft laughter. A sigh like the exhale of old air conditioning. Inside the pediatric ward, the air was colder. Curtains hung stiff as parchment around rusted beds. Above the nurse's counter, an old time card machine sat frozen. The last timestamp read April 3rd, 1975, 2047. A smell of smoke drifted faintly through the stale air. Clara's throat tightened. Was this the night of the fire? As she reached for the counter, the temperature dropped so sharply her breath fogged. Through the misted window of the nurse's office, a figure stood, facing away from her. The same white uniform, neat and unwrinkled, shoulders lifted as if mid-motion. Clara swallowed hard. "Hello?" No reply, just the creak of a chair turning. Then the nurse spoke, voice gentle but wrong again, slightly delayed, slightly static. "You came back. Good. You have steady hands. We need those tonight. Picture 4. Clara took one step closer. "Who are you?" Without turning, the woman said, "Instructor Wong. You can call me Miss Wong if you want to keep things proper." Clara blinked in disbelief. The name echoed from the rumors. A real nurse, possibly a teacher, who never escaped the fire. The woman finally turned, and for one heartbeat, she looked alive. Pale but warm, light shimmering across eyes that once may have been kind. Then her expression flickered between two images, the living and the burnt. The smell of charred antiseptic deepened. Alarms, real or remembered, screamed faintly from nowhere. Clara's rational mind fractured as she stumbled backward. "Please," Miss Wong said softly. "They can't rest until their charts are complete." Clara saw that each child-sized bed still had an open chart folder on its table. Half had names burnt into the paper edges. She didn't want to look, but curiosity overcame dread. The first name she could fully read was Clara L. Her chest constricted. "That's not me," she whispered. Miss Wong smiled faintly. "Not you. The other Clara. You're merely finishing what she began." Lightning flashed through the old skylight, though outside was perfectly clear. For a second, the ward looked new again, brightly lit, full of children smiling, nurses walking calmly. Then everything blinked back to ruin. The nurse's trolley rolled forward on its own, coming to rest beside her knee. One of the drawers slid open. Inside lay a photo, black and white, slightly warped. A much younger woman stood amid a group of student nurses, smiling shyly. On her badge, C. Lee, student nurse. Clara's hands shook. "That's my grandmother." Miss Wong nodded slowly. She promised she'd come back for check-in. She never did. The corridor behind them groaned, as though the building itself inhaled. Ceiling dust drifted down like ash. Each sound became a whisper, the shuffle of small feet, children crying quietly behind curtains, a lullaby sung half off key. Clara pressed both palms over her ears. "Stop! Stop it!" Silence fell instantly. When she dared open her eyes, Miss Wong was standing inches away, her face suddenly kind again. "When the alarms sound," she said, "follow the red light, or you'll never find the stairs." "What alarms?" "Not yet." The old nurse smiled faintly, then faded like dust caught in sunlight. The next sound was a long, low wail from the intercom, an alarm steadily rising into a shriek. The red lights above the door began flashing, painting everything in pulsing blood color. Clara ran. The corridor seemed longer now, the doors farther apart. She reached the stairwell just as the emergency door slammed itself open. Wind cold, electric. From below rose the fragrance of smoke and disinfectant, of something burning and something preserved. Through the flickers of the light, she thought she saw other shapes descending ahead of her, figures in uniforms, guiding gurneys, moving endlessly down the steps toward darkness. The last thing she heard before crossing into the stairwell was Miss Wong's fading voice, clear this time and human. "You can help them leave, or stay here forever." The door closed on its own behind her, and this time it locked. When Clara opened her eyes, she was on the stair landing, covered in a thin layer of dust. For a few seconds, she thought she had truly escaped, but the door she had just slammed behind her was gone. Only a wall of cracked tiles remained. Dim morning light slid through one shattered window, painting shapes on the floor. She was standing in what looked like a reception area, abandoned decades ago. A steel filing cabinet lay overturned, and old medical charts were scattered like leaves. Her body ached. On her wrist, the faint mark of a handprint was still visible, this time darker, deeper, as if pressed from beneath her skin. She stumbled forward, whispering, "I'm still dreaming. I was supposed to leave. I already left." But on the front desk lay a folder she hadn't seen before. Its cover was labeled, "Ward C Fire Incident, Staff Casualties." She opened it with shaking fingers. Inside were photographs of former nurses, each labeled, dated, and marked deceased. The fourth photo made her freeze. It was her grandmother, C. Lee, wearing the same smock and shy smile as the photo in the trolley. But below the photo, someone had written in fading pencil, "Returned, April 3rd, 047. "Returned?" Clara whispered the word under her breath. A sound answered her, a rolling echo, faint but unmistakable, the steady squeak of wheels on linoleum. She turned slowly. The same trolley was coming down the hall, perfectly straight, as if guided by invisible hands. Behind it walked Miss Wong. Picture 3. This time, the nurse's face looked peaceful, almost alive. The light flickered behind her, soft blue instead of red. "You found her file," Miss Wong said softly. "Then you know she came back when the alarms first rang. She tried to open the exit for the children. She almost made it." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "She didn't survive." "No," the nurse murmured. "She stayed to keep them calm. But she promised she would keep watch until someone of her blood returned to finish signing the roll." The weight of understanding sank into Clara's chest. The silent wing was not sealed only for safety. It was sealed to contain unfinished duty, a circle of care that refused to end. Miss Wong stepped closer, placing an icy hand over Clara's. "If you write your name here," she said, pointing at a faded ledger on the trolley. They can leave. So can you. Clara hesitated. Her eyes moved across the names, Wong, Lee, Chan, and finally C. Lee. The ink near each name looked wet though untouched for decades. When she reached the blank line below, her wrist began to burn. The handprint on her skin pulsed like a heartbeat. I don't understand, she whispered. If I sign, what happens to me? Miss Wong smiled gently. It depends on how long you plan to stay. A sudden gust swept through the hallway, lifting the loose scripts into the air like birds taking flight. Through the open window, Clara saw rays of sunrise for the first time since she entered the building. Tears blurred her vision. She picked up the pen and wrote her name, Clara Lee, granddaughter. The sound that followed was not frightening. It was a release, a deep sigh echoing through every wall. The air warmed. Light filled the cracks of the ceiling, and faint laughter of unseen children rippled past her ears. Miss Wong's figure shimmered like glass catching the morning rays. You have a good heart, she said. She must be proud. Clara blinked, and the nurse was gone. The trolley stood quietly by the door, gleaming and still. The air smelled of roses instead of smoke. For the first time, the main entrance door stood wide open. Clara stepped outside into the brightness of early day. The city was already awake, buses, students, traffic. Behind her, the hospital wing looked cleaner somehow. The burnt windows reflected blue sky instead of darkness. She turned her phone on. It finally connected. The screen filled with missed notifications, as if time inside had barely passed. When she looked at her wrist again, the handprint had faded completely. Only a faint white scar remained, like a line of light. And then she noticed something that made her freeze, the hospital's brass nameplate. Beneath the engraved letters University Medical Building, a smaller line had been etched in the metal, so faint it could be missed unless sunlight hit it directly. In honor of Instructor Wong and Nurse C. Lee, guardians of Ward C. Clara stood silently for a long time. Maybe the ghosts had finally left. Or maybe they had just found peace, knowing she remembered. She turned away, whispering under her breath, "Rest now. The record's complete." As she walked down the path, she thought she heard one last voice from behind the locked doors, soft, almost playful. Patient discharged. Picture 8. And that was the end of the silent wing. But if you ever walk past an old hospital late at night and hear wheels turning when no one is there, don't look back. Because some duties never end. They only wait for the next name. Have you ever heard of a haunting like this, where family ties cross the line between life and death? Tell your thoughts below. Your comments and your own stories might inspire our next episode.